Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of video game news. Today is July 10th, 2024. Now, weirdly, in the last recording, I took a phone call for about 20 minutes and muted myself. So, there was a large period of time there in which I just was playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And in total silence, and possibly, coincidentally, but very possibly not, the average watch time on the last stream was like way higher. So if I really just didn't care about the art or the criticism or whatever artistic expression I'm doing as being a video game critic, even in this case when I'm just doing video game news and being more of a news reporter than an artist, but yeah, if I didn't care about the substance of what I was creating, in any case, I would just follow the algorithm. I just follow YouTube's reception there, and potentially just go completely silent and do live streams of completely silent Yu-Gi-Oh! Or perhaps it's not even an issue of going completely silent as much as it is an issue of leaving people hanging and teasing the audience by muting myself and being quiet. I imagine a lot of that watch time really is probably just one of my long-term fans, Lemon Lover in particular, watching. Just getting even a couple of people to stay around for a long enough time really helps. Anyways, moving on to the rest of that, I'm starting late today, mostly because I ordered groceries and they were running late, but I have had to do some other things today too that have taken up more of my time, and that is the case that it's likely going to be for the next few weeks. I still am also spending way too much time checking slickdeals.net and just the Amazon app, and it's still 6 days away from Prime Day. So if there is even a sale to be gotten, it's far away, almost a full week away. I did, after playing Nancy Drew, decide I wanted to play a kind of no-name mystery game, and so I started running a game that honestly I couldn't even tell you the name of it off the top of my head, and with that I immediately realized it wasn't going to be much of a story mystery experience, which is what I was really looking for. It's going to be much more of your traditional the room style experiences, which became much more prevalent, where it's very loose story. It's just 3D objects, 3D puzzle boxes running around in the Unity engine, or more accurately, I guess it's important to say there is no running. There is no third-person characters, third-person perspective characters. It is just you in first-person perspective, looking at objects and spinning them around and looking for solutions. It's basically the room. But honestly, if I played a room-like game every 6 months or so, I would be perfectly happy with that. They tend to be fairly short, and they tend to be fairly easy to get around. I would say that the room itself, once you got into the second and third game, did start to go a little off the rails with its story, but it still doesn't really matter that much, because the real interaction of the game is still the puzzle. But what I really would like to find is something that is closer to a telltale game or a visual novel, something where it really is a mystery and you're trying to solve it. And at a certain level, AAA games sometimes do have mysteries in it. Like Control is an example of a game that has a mystery in it, but you definitely wouldn't call Control a mystery game. Maybe that's the thing, is that once you start getting up to making AAA games, maybe mystery has to be a second or third aspect added to the experience. It can't be the first aspect or the second aspect of a game. I've been watching a lot of different YouTube channels getting recommended to me, so I do feel like the algorithm, which we knew YouTube was changing the algorithm a little bit to highlight smaller content creators and new content in general instead of just the same old. But yeah, one of the videos I watched was interesting in that it compared Elden Ring as a fantasy RPG game to Skyrim, mostly in the sense that it was a hour-plus long diatribe about why Skyrim sucks and has always sucked. And you know, this was a video before Starfield came out, so they were actually very hopeful around Starfield, which I'm sure they were fairly disappointed to find in here that didn't work either. Starfield wasn't any really better than the Skyrim from 10 years ago. And I think a lot of his criticisms were fairly on the nose correct, as far as just Skyrim has a lot of stuff in it, but it often doesn't matter, or pretty much never matters in Skyrim what you do. Skyrim kind of has a terrible system in which you're walking around on bad open terrain and often have to do that shuffle where you're trying to break the wall system to get over mountains. Yeah, I'm not gonna try and recap everything in there, but what I did find interesting is, because that's certainly not something I thought about, is that is the new Skyrim really Elden Ring? Have Demon Souls and Dark Souls and Bloodborne all been working their way up to redefining fantasy RPGs or Western fantasy RPGs as super difficult, heavy in deep lore, but often you have to seek out that deep lore yourself experiences? Of course, the other comparison is The Witcher 3, and in my book, I think there probably is a separation of those two types of games, and there is going to be more of a Souls-like game genre that is designed around large challenges and difficulty, and mostly just being boss rush experiences. And then there's The Witcher 3, which is much more heavy into having a singular narrative story, a linear story. And yeah, when you start to compare Skyrim to Witcher 3, that's a closer, easier comparison in my mind to make, and Witcher 3 being a much newer game easily beats Skyrim. But even if Witcher 3 had the same level of graphics and just and it was just Skyrim's story to Witcher 3's story, Witcher 3 by far would still succeed. And you know, I've been watching a lot of documents like that. I saw another one that talked about how the real team behind making Fable 1 was actually a subsidiary of Lion's Head, I believe is the name of the company. And so Peter Molyneux really basically was allowed to steal the credit for Fable 1 when I don't think, according to the YouTube video that I watched, he was not really even involved with it. Which, that's interesting. And when you think about Fable as far as a fantasy game, Fable comes off very awkwardly too. And mostly that's because it has a story, and good for it for having a story, or at least some story. But it's just not a particularly good one because it's so open-ended, where you can play as the good guy or the bad guy, and then the system is overly engineered to accommodate and react to whether you play the good guy or the bad guy. Yeah, and let me think if there's anything else I did. I finished watching all of Warehouse 13. Went all the way around. I had only a couple months ago watched the last 6 episodes in season 6. I still very much, or I think it's actually season 5, the last season of Warehouse 13, I still very much feel like the actor who played Pete Latimer was either signed up to do a movie or another TV show already by the time they started filming those last 6 episodes, or there was some kind of internal problem that never really came to the public, because you just don't have a character with a completely different haircut, a goofy, like, bad haircut as an actor show up in that, when his hair had always been very nice, professional. He's supposed to have been a Secret Service agent before he was a warehouse agent. And his haircut, I guess, echoes also this idea that he was described more as a goofy character in the later seasons. And really, there's always kind of comic relief, but I think they made him really, really goofy. The only real characterization they ever gave him was that he used to be an alcoholic. He never really struggled at all with sobriety, and it only got mentioned like 2 or 3 times. And he was obviously written from the beginning to fall in love with the female agent, but even that is fairly hamstrung because they never actually wanted a romance relationship in the story. They just wanted to dangle the possibility of a romance that they could fulfill at the very end of the last episode, which is exactly what they did. And they went out of their way to kind of ruin the possibility of a spin-off or anything. There's like one scene set decades in the future that would have been much wiser to not have included, in case they wanted to move on to a Warehouse 14 sequel, or in case they just wanted to change the events of the future. There is time travel and things like that in Warehouse 13, so they certainly could do it if they wanted to do it. And frankly, it's been so long now, you could just reboot the whole series, or hope nobody remembers the original series and just continue it, although you couldn't really continue it with the same actors because they're all so old now. Now the funny thing there is, looking at Wikipedia for the cancellation of Warehouse 13, or just Googling it. I don't know what I was actually looking at. It kind of implies that Warehouse 13 got canceled so that there would be more budget to move the Sci-Fi channel, SYFY, over to making The Magicians TV series, which, yeah, The Magicians is Harry Potter if they were college adults doing drugs and drinking. A much more mature, in-your-face, kind of punk show with just a whole new Attitude Era type feel to reference wrestling, whereas Warehouse 13 was very much a goofier, this is a family-friendly show that is fun for the whole family. Okay, one of the things to take from that, though, on a broader scale, is that if SYFY channel was shifting from a family-friendly target audience to a more mature adults-only target audience as an extended cable channel, they're going in the exact opposite direction. You're going to a smaller audience, and you're going to an older audience, whereas anybody who even knows a little bit about TV, particularly television at that time, you would have been targeting the 20-somethings, people who are young, who may watch TV for their whole lifetime, might have watched TV. I don't now that really would have been the case. And yeah, even now there are a couple shows. Surreal Estate is pretty much the only thing, and then Reginald the Vampire is on the Sci-Fi channel, and that's, and maybe two other shows not worth mentioning, but yeah, Surreal Estate 2, targeting an older audience, not really family friendly. And I think that probably hurts the concept of sci-fi, a channel dedicated around sci-fi in particular, because that really bites you in the butt when you start to look at like all the Marvel movies, and where should the Marvel movies be rerun all the time? If Marvel movies, the superhero movies, are not science fiction, then what the heck are they? Like maybe Thor you would say is fantasy, but not really. And so even on the Sci-Fi channel, I imagine they are rerunning a lot of Avengers movies, Iron Man movies, things like that. And then when it comes to prime time, when they actually do have a new TV show to try to get an audience that would stick specifically around for that channel, they have Reginald the Vampire and Surreal Real Estate. That doesn't work well at all. I think part of the problem, though, why Warehouse 13 also started to run its course is that they had run out of ideas season to season as far as making a bad guy, and they had started to go in directions such as combining two artifacts abilities, which would be great, and you see that in like feature power creeps in anime and such, but then they were condoning instantaneously, saying that's wrong, you shouldn't be combining two items abilities. Yeah, and so most of the interesting ideas for maybe 3 out of 5 seasons was a bad guy using artifacts for their own personal gain, which would have made the artifacts more interesting. But yeah, I guess I'm done with Warehouse 13 now, so I'll probably move on to wasting time watching something else or trying to make footage. Inherently, my macro is still broken as far as opening the news articles for the live streams scheduling might work. So if I did focus and just schedule videos, I could get a lot more of that done, and should get a lot more of that done. I am gonna start running out of footage, pre-recorded footage, and it's like I've recorded the footage, I just haven't scheduled it. Be so nice to have a secretary handle all that, or have YouTube be much better at handling all of that. Yeah. I guess I don't really have much of anything else to say, so let me just scroll down my main Twitter since we started later here and see if any major news. Apparently I showed this video, excuse me for coughing, before, of these YouTubers having this kind of short overlay element here. And I thought this was just like some kind of custom thing that they had, that yeah, I'm hearing the audio here, so I'm getting a little distracted. But anyways, these mini games apparently are something just built into YouTube. It's a Minecraft Rush YouTube Shorts effect. Okay, I guess that's something that YouTube is doing now. Perhaps that is something that is new and creative from YouTube, but I heavily suspect it isn't. I heavily suspect it is just some kind of Instagram or TikTok equivalent of thing that people have been doing for a long time, and I'm just not on Instagram or TikTok, so I don't see it. I don't know if I mentioned this or updated people on this. I don't know real reason. I had managed to knock over a full glass of water on my bedside table while my tablet was charging in the floor, putting a ton of water onto the tablet. And when I turned on the tablet, it was doing a video test pattern, and then the screen turned off. Well, I turned off the device after stupidly turning it on a couple of times and left it sitting for I think at least 24 hours. Maybe it wasn't really 24 hours, maybe it was only 12. And as far as I can tell, everything dried out and everything works. You just, the rice thing you don't really need to do. It's not recommended because either the places where water are going to be so small that rice is not going to put some harmless gas out that would cause water to evaporate faster. If you were going to do the rice thing, it would be better to just have desiccant packets in a bag and ziplocking the device in the bag. But even that I don't think is the right way to do it. I think it really is just to have the device in the air, laying where you don't move it any further. So whatever position it is, don't move it out of that orientation. So if it's lying flat, leave it lying flat. That way the water inside won't just continue to slosh around. And just leave it for 24 hours and hope it dries. And it really is just a gamble, a coin flip as far as whether it dries or not. People who do the rice and have their device survive almost certainly would have had their device survived without the rice doing as I'm suggesting. And people who do the rice and the device is totally broken, the device would have probably been broken without the rice. Rice inherently is adding some kind of particles, some kind of dirt, something extra you really don't want. Yeah. But yeah, I got really lucky, it seems, and so I'm not going to really need to buy a new tablet. that being said, I guess I should warn that the Samsung electronic workers, some of them at least in South Korea, have gone on strike. So Samsung products in general, electronic products in general, might see some shortages in the future, in the near future, in the far future. Maybe no shortages will really be seen at all. All are possibilities, but if you were going to speculate, and there might be some shortages there. So if you take that as a possibility, it would probably be fairly wise to buy any Samsung products you want as far as Samsung electronics go, whether that's phones or appliances or TVs. Samsung did, and probably the strike was lined up to this announcement. They did announce the new Note 7 and Flip 7, I believe it's 7 series, and a smartwatch, Samsung Watch 7. So it's a whole 7 series of a phone that folds in half, a phone that flips down in half, and a smartwatch. All of those are elements that all of those are new phones that might be interesting. And then the S24 Ultra would be your more standard Samsung phone to look for if you're in the market to buy the most expensive phones. Although inherently phones have just gotten more and more expensive, and the value of the US dollar, which is what prices are listed in when I look at them, has gone down and down and down. So there's definitely a case here where these prices have gotten way too high for most people. And there certainly has been a trick that's been done where there's a small audience of cell phone people, mostly I would imagine this is iPhone people, who have gotten into this habit of trading in last year's model of an iPhone or any cell phone for this year's model with a deep discount. So if you're getting $400 or $500 off of an $1,100 smartphone, to get it back down to a more reasonable $600, which is still a really high amount of money, even if you are carrying a very compact computer in your pocket. That is definitely a different situation than if you are coming from having bought an unlocked cell phone, say 5 years ago, and only paying $300 or $400 for it. Of course, in the US, they try to lock you into contracts to discount the prices of those very expensive cell phones. I would almost suggest getting some of the refurbished phones from Amazon on Prime Day, but I just have no idea what the refurbished process really looks like and how good it actually is. I don't think it means that they put a new battery in it, and even if they did put a new battery in it, I don't think that means it's a new battery that hasn't been sitting on the shelf for 2 or 3 years, that's the one thing. And I believe it's 2026 when the European Union is going to supposedly force all cell phone people to have easily replaceable batteries in phones sold in the European Union, where we might start to see models that hit a point where it is reasonable that you could find aftermarket batteries and replace them. But yeah, none of that has anything to do with video games though, and I'm already gonna run late today, so let's start going through the news. That's enough warm up. I'm not gonna get any more warmed up. Apparently 2K's Bioshock team is recruiting like mad for the next series entry. Cloud Chamber has almost 30 openings to work on the game. It is important though to point out here that this team making whatever the next game in the Bioshock series is going to be is not likely to include anyone who worked on Bioshock 1 who are making a competing new game, or even I suspect it's not even going to be, if they're hiring so many people, it's not going to be a significant percentage of people who worked on Bioshock 2. And 2K owning the rights to the name Bioshock is kind of a great way to see where the direction of Borderlands potentially could go. Also, in that 2K might just own Borderlands as a product, but that doesn't inherently mean that they are going to always have Gearbox making Borderlands games. And that might be for the better anyways, because either Gearbox out of Frisco, Texas was dropping the ball on the pre-sequel and Borderlands 3 in part because they were burnt out, or they're just not really the same team they once were to make Borderlands 1 and Borderlands 2. And it does definitely feel like two games from the same company is about as much as you should ever ask as a publisher. Let's just die by my own hand here. Yeah, there's a benefit to killing yourself in these kinds of games because it stops the opponent from wasting your time trying to finish daily quests and things like that. Which, noticeably, I did not finish all the daily quests today. We've seen sea, we've seen air. The only other places a new fantastical world for Bioshock 4 could be is either land or space, unless they're going to try and go incredibly crazy with it and make it a multi-dimensional, more like Control game, which, you know, it might be heavily influenced around Control, and there might just be a lot of SCPs running around in Bioshock 4. Or you could have one SCP that would be the new Big Daddy, certainly, in Bioshock 4. Inherently, you would want them to live under the title of Bioshock, so there would be some biological gene engineering going, but I could certainly see that. It's been claimed, though, and this is probably true, that it's going to be set in the 1960s in a fictional Antarctic city called Borealis. We've also seen we've seen in Bioshock 1 a libertarian city. In Bioshock 2 you saw that libertarian city kind of go towards socialism, but not really be given a fair shake. I imagine they'd never really do a fully communist city. And Bioshock 3 was more of a religious theological city than anything. Certainly wasn't talking too much about economic theories in Bioshock Infinite. So there's still a few other economic theories to touch on if they were going to go that route, but I wouldn't be surprised if they really don't go that route. And inherently, it is not just the case that the Bioshock 1 city was just a libertarian city. It was also, in part, an Andrew Ryan city based on the concepts that were established by Andrew Ryan. Had there been a different leader in that city, that underwater city, the world could have been fairly different. And then I guess there is a question as far as will there be a lighthouse? Will it dance around the end of Bioshock Infinite, which kind of wraps up the whole concept of at least Bioshock Infinite, if not Bioshock 1 and 2. And we still have the director worship in the game industry, where they're talking about Ken Levine not being involved in the new game, which is probably for the better, because Ken Levine's not, he's working on Judas technically, but he's just the director, so there's a bunch of people under him working on Judas. And yeah, I suppose overall the headline here is telling you very little, in that they're just hiring or recruiting. It tells me that they probably are in a pre-production stage, about to go into a production stage, and that actual code and actual concepts have not been locked down yet. But they may really rush something out just to compete against Judas. You can kind of tell, we'll be able to tell how petty 2K and Ken Levine are inherently if it becomes obvious that either 2K or Ken Levine are releasing their games at the same time. They compete against each other in the same way that we saw the remake of Dead Space and the Callisto Protocol releasing at the same time. Telltale tweeted something. They really don't have anything new to say. Their pinned tweet is from 2023. And what they retweeted was just a reminder that they exist, effectively showing the previous Telltale company's game of Batman, Two-Face there. But yeah, the Expanse Telltale game is about the only game that the current Telltale possibly is even really worked on. And certainly they're not churning out games as fast as the old Telltale, but which is a good thing, but they're not churning out games fast enough at all. There definitely should be a new announcement for something new, other than just The Wolf Among Us 2, which is taking them forever to actually produce and get removed from, get it released. One thing that you certainly could see with The Walking Dead being a comic and The Wolf Among Us being a comic, the Telltale concept of games really should have leaned more into making more comic book based games, and I guess they kind of did. There's a lot of Marvel and DC Batman things, but they probably could have saved on some budgets getting licenses to lesser known things. If there was, for instance, a Saga Telltale game or a Sandman Telltale game, if before the Netflix Sandman TV series had been made, that would have probably helped them be a lot more successful and not eventually go bankrupt. But yeah, they were going, certainly when they're going for Batman games, they are going for a large audience, which probably costs a much larger amount of money to license. Our next story here is apparently the Pokemon sleep tracking app has generated $100 million in a year. I have no idea how they made any money at all. Like, what in the world makes... I guess you're just buying items. Sleep score is added to a score earned from a Snorlax minigame which players can pay to upgrade. There is also a premium pass available for purchase which offers various benefits. Interesting. So people paid $100 million in microtransactions. Kids, potentially, I would assume, paid $100 million in a year for an app that monitors supposedly how you sleep. Ridiculous. GameDeveloper.com has a report here that says Riot scrapped a Smash Brothers inspired fighting game over market concerns. The title was codenamed Pool Party, which is funny because they're pretty sure there is a game called Pool Party or something close to that on Steam. It apparently had 80 developers working on it and was set in the League of Legends universe. Yeah, I could see market concerns of it being set around the League of Legends characters, since I don't know too many League of Legends characters. I feel like Jinx is probably a League of Legends character, and that's about the only one I think I could name. So if all of a sudden there was a Smash Brothers game around those characters, I wouldn't be super happy or hyped about it. Inherently, even the first Smash Brothers game for Nintendo got very lucky by being the first type of game like that, because there's a significant number of characters that most people don't care about, aren't going to care about in Smash Brothers. And there's just a ton of content in Smash Brothers as far as trophies and things you can do, and lots of replayability. Which that is the one argument that they probably should have made a Smash Brothers. Overwatch in the same case. If they made a Smash Brothers minigame based on the Overwatch characters, that would have made some sense. August 9th is the release date for the Borderlands movie. And they have another teaser trailers and things like that. I cannot possibly imagine that this movie is going to do well, and that's not criticizing any part of the movie at all. I'm just saying in the current environment as far as movies go, it just doesn't make a lot of sense that any movie is going to possibly succeed. And if a movie is going to succeed, it's going to have to be an amazingly interesting game or a movie that would bring people to the theaters in a era which people don't go to theaters, to such an extreme that AMC, which also owns AMC movie theaters, is going in a very weird direction, in my opinion, in that at some point they merged with, I want to say Sundance, but I might be wrong about that. Or they acquired a company. And so now when you go to Hulu, some of the newest anime series that are streaming on Hulu in the United States are labeled as being from AMC. But AMC, the cable channel, is not airing any anime. That'd be kind of weird for them to do that. Maybe they would eventually. And AMC, the movie theaters, are not airing any anime movies specifically, or anime TV series. That is something that maybe the AMC movie theaters and movie theaters in general could do, is just have long marathons of TV shows. I imagine there are some people who would enjoy watching something like The Boys in a movie theater, although that does highlight another appropriateness issue where something like The Boys might be rated so inappropriately that you couldn't air it in a group setting in a theater. You could, but probably would cause controversy. But yeah, to get back to my original point, I just question if any movie is going to do well, and I don't see how Borderlands is going to be uniquely special to overlook that. I also found out that there's a new Saw movie, Saw 10, I believe, that I think has come out, and I'd like to see it, but it's too new to see it for free on any of the streaming services. Speaking of streaming services, it is also Dish TV, man, I'm talking about just everything here, is trying to convince people to sign a 2-year contract by giving away free Netflix accounts, which, you know, if you know for a fact you're gonna stick with Dish TV for the next 2 years, getting free Netflix is not a terrible offer, but certainly it would be way cheaper just to buy Netflix and get rid of Dish TV if you're not watching Dish TV, because Dish is, like all cable providers or satellite providers, way too expensive. And that really just would be anti-cord cutting at a certain point. Let's try to get back on track here though and talk about actual news. A mythology of Elden Ring book has been announced. I guess it's called Grace Given. Which, okay. Check that out at Video Games Chronicles if you're interested. It's being written by the Elden Ring lore expert Jeff Smalltown Truscott, not by George R.R. Martin. So I assume it's a finished book. Actually, George R.R. Martin was talking about how you wanted Elden Ring to potentially become a movie or TV, which, no duh, that obviously was his hopes, is that if he could get it in via video games, he could get back to getting overpaid to make a TV series. House of the Dragon is airing on TV as a prequel to Game of Thrones, so I guess people aren't super mad at him that he still hasn't finished the book series, Ice and Fire book series. Microsoft and Apple have backed away from an open AI board amid regulatory scrutiny, with potential antitrust concerns hovering over OpenAI. The two tech companies are cutting bait before FTC and the CMA turn their attention towards them. Now, that would be interesting to see who is left on this OpenAI board. This is the same OpenAI that randomly kicked out Sam Altman and then brought him back after major pressure, in part from Microsoft, so Sam Altman might be out of the picture. I am definitely hearing more talk about how AI has not only plateaued, it's starting to crumble under the massive amount of hype that it lifted it up as to people's attention, and people are just starting to realize that AI is not really artificial intelligence in the first place. It's just rebranding of large language models, not modules. But yeah, I think people have lost any interest in AI because there's basically nothing you can do with it. That the promises are just not that fulfilled. The only place I see AI being used these days is by bots on Facebook making awful, obvious AI generated images to manipulate the Facebook algorithm, which needs some improvement to not be so easily manipulatable. Let's see, Steam Deck retweeted that Session Skate Sim has now been Steam Deck verified with Steam Cloud saves. So we've got yet another game. Um, retweeting today's the last day on the summer sale to buy games. Obviously, I'm not going to buy games for myself. There was a point today where buying the SwitchBot S10, very expensive robot vacuum, would have come in handy. But yeah, I had to clean my own floor like a normal person. But even in doing that, the floor does need more mopping. It was filthy. Running a paper towel on the floor and it comes back pure black. Yep. Nothing else really to say about the Steam Deck though. I clicked on that. The mobile developer Pixelberry has been acquired by Series Entertainment. These are two companies I do not recognize. This is a generative AI developer. In fairness, if this is a generative AI image, this looks way better than most of the ones I see. Yeah, that just reminded me. There was another video I watched. It was pretty bad. It was somebody watching somebody else's video and not really reacting to it. And it was somebody pretty big doing that too. Just very minimal commentary on someone else's video, where the main video that was being watched was talking about how Nutaku is a bigger game marketplace than Steam apparently. And that Nutaku actually is secretly owned by the parent company of Pornhub, which, okay. And they were just in general talking about Nutaku being very successful, and yeah, there's always been a demand for adult games, and Nutaku's medium level of quality of making adult games is obviously satisfying that demand to a small extent. But I will say, from my own personal look at the Nutaku games, most of them are pretty bad games. Most of them are mobile first games, and all of them have premium currency type elements to them, and they are overrun with far too many microtransactions. They are very much free to start type experiences, not free to play all the way to the end type experiences. Because they're mobile games, you're kind of looking for something that you could return to on a day-to-day basis, whereas they probably would have been better if they were one and done type experiences, where you play it for a month or two and then you're done with it. But yeah, I haven't said anything or looked at Nutaku in quite a while. There was a game called College Days I was trying to play. There was effectively just an adult version of Simpsons Tapped Out, and even cheating in that game, you really couldn't get anywhere interesting. I still feel like Tinka Fuma, which I am still playing on my phone as an adult game, is doing a lot better, because it is more of just a standard automated gacha game where you don't have to really, you're doing more strategy. You're not really tapping or manipulating the characters. They can just play automatically most of the time, and every month there's a new expansion, new story, new characters to collect. Whereas the College Days game, or whatever it was called, from Nutaku, seemed to add a very small amount of content every 2 months. It was just not refreshed well enough, and the animation was not really particularly good, which I think is the case for most Nutaku games. That being said, that also, I think at most, if it is true that Nutaku is making more money than Steam is, that highlights where Steam has done a very poor job of allowing the appropriate people to know that adult games exist on Steam, and allowing actual adult games of a higher quality to be on Steam and stand out on Steam, whereas Steam is very much just flooded with a lot of adult visual novels that often are 3D CGI garbage, where I think Nutaku picks for better quality games, and their storefront doesn't seem to be flooded with absolute low-level trash. Moving on though, Modern Warfare 3 is reportedly coming to the Xbox Game Pass this month. When I was running the my macros today, it opened a whole bunch of extra tabs of old games. I went back and closed them all, I think, but we may have more games to look at today just because it's Wednesday. July's PlayStation Plus game catalog and classic titles have been confirmed, including Crisis Core, Final Fantasy VII Reunion, Remnant 2, and Jeanne d'Arc and Summoner. Jeanne d'Arc. I don't think I know that game, Jeanne d'Arc. Nintendo apparently has released a creepy teaser trailer for a mystery M-rated Switch game. Who is Emio? I suspect this is a titled Smiling Man in Japanese, Komatsu is reporting. I suspect this is just once again a case where Nintendo is just pushing out the last of the Nintendo Switch projects that they've effectively told everybody in their first party and second party development teams that they need to get everything out by the end of this year, by Christmas, but probably by Black Friday, because starting that first quarter in 2025, it's expected that the Switch successor is going to come out, and whatever games are going to be on that, I think are just going to be completely different games. I think they might run on completely different hardware. It might be a case that the next Nintendo Switch is going to run on an ARM processor, or maybe even an Apple M2 type processor. Some kind of custom hardware from Nintendo, maybe even the Apple custom M2 or M3s. But if it is a reduced instruction set ARM license, or if it's a case that maybe the Switch is on ARM hardware instead of AMD 64 complete instruction set CPUs, I think there might be a fairly big jump there. Although it may not have anything to do with CPU, it may have a lot more to do with GPU. It may be that the next generation console is just going to demand that all games look a lot better than the 10-year-old plus hardware that is in the Switch. And so it feels like there's probably a line that's been drawn where some games have been designed in such a way that they can be upgraded to higher graphics for the next console, and then some games like this, I would assume, are always going to be a lower budget game, and as such they are they aren't going to really look good enough on the next console. And it may just be that for the launch period, the first 6 weeks to 6 months of the next Nintendo console, they're going to push for games that look really good to be released exclusively on that console, and then the standards might get lowered. But we do have a new Nintendo president in Japan now too, so it might be that standards are just going to be higher always, and we're not going to see a Switch Online full of low effort, low quality visual games. But yeah, it definitely screams that with the launch of the next Nintendo console, though, there are going to be new games, not just cross-generational upgrades to games. It may be the case that there is going to be a lot of re-releases of the same game. I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo comes out and says, we have Mario Odyssey, but now it's called Mario Odyssey 128. And it is a new release with upscaled graphics and improvements, and it runs on a completely different type of cartridge, or it doesn't have cartridges at all and it downloads only. But yeah, they may very well just call it the Super Switch, and there may just be super versions of old games. That's another potential name they probably won't use. Anyway, Sonic Team's boss would like one day to make a Sonic RPG. How have we gotten to 30 years with no RPGs? I kind of feel like there was some kind of Sonic RPG at one point. Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood for Nintendo DS. It was made by BioWare, so there was one. I kind of feel like there was something sort of like an RPG with Sonic characters on something like the N-Gage or some of those early portable cell phone type devices that didn't sell. That being said, let's take a step back and think about Sonic games. And it seems like once you think about it for more than a second, it is pretty obvious why Sonic hasn't had an RPG game. There's no reason it would have an RPG game. Sonics have always been high action, racing, running games. Role-playing games tend not to be built around twitch actions and running and racing in any way, and putting the Sonic characters in a role-playing game is assuming that the Sonic characters have a lot more characterization that the players care about than they really do. Like, if anything, it would probably, if you were forced it through, it'd probably be best to do something like the South Park game, some of the first South Park games, where it's the South Park kids, but then they're playing pretend, and so you would have Miles turn into a mage in his imagination, and Sonic turn into a maybe archer or something, Knuckles into like a barbarian, or I don't even know who this character's name is. But yeah, if you were going to do an RPG game, it would almost have to be a fantasy joke, kind of like Tiny Tina's DLC in Borderlands. It also probably speaks to part of the reason why Sonic games are always so bad from Sega, in that the person in charge of the Sonic team is wanting to do RPGs instead of focusing on just making good Sonic games, which I feel like Team Sonic really has made more bad Sonic games than they have good ones. The NBA 2K25 release date and cover stars have been revealed, so here we can see all of them, which I suspect that this one will be seen considerably less, and I suspect this one is the highest level of cost. Like, this is the deluxe version, and yeah, this is probably the second tier. This is probably the first tier. What does it say? It says WNBA edition, All-Star edition, and Hall of Fame edition. And then this one has nothing there. So yeah, I heavily suspect the WNBA edition is not going to be sold anywhere as much, because the framing of the character here is just completely different. It's the only one where somebody's holding their hands up and has a trophy. You're not seeing the floor. You're not seeing her feet. Now I suspect that this lady here is also this lady here, assuming this is a lady, and that she is a celebrity basketball player. I don't know who she is, but whatever. This guy here might be this guy too, for all I can, but I don't think so. It looks like a pretty different facial structure. And since I don't really care about NBA 2K, I'm gonna leave it at that. New Microsoft advert highlights that you don't need an Xbox to play Xbox. This is in part where they have put Xbox streaming onto Amazon Fire Sticks. They also are working supposedly to get all Xbox games to work streaming to things like Fire TV sticks. And notice that they announced all this, and then only a day or two later they announced a new tier for Xbox and raised the price of Xbox Live, which we'll talk about that in a second. Suicide Squad Season 2 release has been delayed at the last minute. The new content will now arrive 2 weeks later than originally planned. It's just kind of funny because I feel like they specifically said it was going to arrive on time. I'm shocked that they're even going to bother to do a Season 2. I just have to assume that there was still a decent amount of content that had already been made. May also just be a case that Warner Brothers has nothing else at the moment, so it's either do nothing or try to justify their existence by continuing to make content. And if they do nothing, now that they're owned by AT&T, it might very well be a case that AT&T just shuts them down. It might very well be the case of just looking busy while the boss is watching. Arc System Works is working on a new 3D Double Dragon game, which 3D is an interesting element to that. But yeah, fighting game developer acquired the IP back in 2015, so they've had 9 years to do something with it and apparently haven't. I guess a question here is, can you even buy the original Double Dragon games? Arc System Works made Guilty Gear Strive, Dragon Ball FighterZ, Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, so owning the IP instead of licensing Dragon Ball, for instance, might work very well for them to increase their profits. Pocket Pair is partnered with Sony for a new Palworld company. Palworld Entertainment will expand and develop the franchise beyond games. So, seems like they really are going to go the route of either making a animated, like they might be making an anime for Japan, they might be making an anime for the West, they might be making stuffed animals and toys. Sony certainly probably can waste the money on something like that, and if it works, they could definitely benefit from that, as they don't have anything that looks kid friendly, and potentially they could make a kid friendly looking movie or TV series with the Palworld characters, and just hope everybody forgets that Palworld really enslaves the creatures to work in their factories automations, and that Palworld has guns. But yeah, Sony certainly could benefit if they could find a Pokemon of their own. anybody would benefit if they could find a Pokemon of their own. Of course, Sony could have also probably partnered with Digimon the same year that Pokemon came out to compete against them decades ago. It'll be interesting to see what this new company actually does in the long run. Here's the story I was talking about. Xbox Game Pass is getting price increase and a standard tier with no day one releases. So from July 10th, the Xbox Game Pass Ultimate tier, which includes PC Game Pass, day one games, back catalog titles, online play, and cloud gaming, is going to increase from $19.99 US dollars to it's going to increase to $19.99 US dollars from $16.99, so $3 increase, which is about, let's say, a 40% increase. Is that correct? Nah, it's probably closer to like a 33% increase. The PC Game Pass is also increasing to $11.99, which they really haven't done anything with the Xbox Microsoft Store and Windows 11 and just gaming on Windows that would justify any increase at all for PC Game Pass. They're going to retire the Xbox Game Pass tier for console for new users. And it's going to be replaced with eventually it's going to be replaced with a new $14.99 standard tier, which is not going to include day one releases or cloud gaming, which I do feel like Microsoft with their Game Pass offerings has very much confused even themselves as far as what is the valuable part of the Game Pass. Is it a back catalog of old games? Is it online play, which should be free? Or is it day one releases? And I think it's day one releases. Cloud gaming, I don't think anybody is buying the Game Pass at the moment for cloud gaming, but their hope is that it would eventually become cloud gaming. At least that was their hope in the past, although the standard tier, not including cloud gaming, definitely says that's not their focus. This may very well be a case where they're changing things because the finances just weren't making sense, or it might be a case where they're changing things because there's just somebody new in charge of it. Which, speaking of people being in charge of things, Activision was initially funding the development of Brutal Legend from Double Fine. And then, after a point early on, Activision stopped funding the development of Brutal Legend, and Double Fine had to seek out other funding to develop Brutal Legend. Well, Activision at that then tried to sue Double Fine and tried to stop any future development for Brutal Legend, which, depending on how the contracts are written, that might have been within Activision's role. Certainly that's a dick move from Activision, and this is an Activision of old, but not that old. It's very possibly the same Activision that exists now, which all comes around full circle to bring about an interesting question, as we have not ever heard any talk of anything new Brutal Legend, possibly because there might have been in the background some contractual legal elements there that might prevent them from making a new Brutal Legend without being under threat of lawsuit from Activision. Well, now Microsoft owns Activision, so, and they own Double Fine. So if everybody is actually getting all along with each other, which there's really no reason to believe everybody inside of Xbox is getting along with each other. But theoretically, doors might have opened up to a new Brutal Legend game. Of course, while I would be interested in the announcement of a new Brutal Legend game, it would pretty much have to be a completely different game in the way it plays. It would just have to be a hack and slash action game, and frankly they would need to mod and re-release the original Brutal Legend to get rid of the stage battles, which nobody liked, or make them skippable at least. And that still doesn't touch upon a growing issue with Brutal Legend, in that a Brutal Legend 2, being so heavily influenced by heavy metal, would have to bring in licensed music, which would be expensive for heavy metal like the first game did, and that would require doing deals and getting music that's now a few more years older. So like Ozzy Osbourne, I believe, actually did voice acting for one of the characters in Brutal Legend 1. Ozzy Osbourne at this point I do not think could do voice acting for a Brutal Legend 2. And I imagine there is a lot of people who are either semi-retired or retired or dead, more than likely, from that heavy metal era. And the fandom around heavy metal probably hasn't changed their favorite songs. So Crazy Train being in Brutal Legend 1, which I think it is, would just have Crazy Train showing back up in Brutal Legend 2. So if anything, they probably should try to make a Brutal Legend 2 that is based off of not heavy metal, but whatever metal would be in the modern time, where instead of getting very recognizable bands and songs that most people would recognize, like Ozzy Osbourne, they're probably going to have to get people like Ghost, or an entire new genre of thrash metal or death metal. Yeah, death metal is probably more of the thought that you would want to go with if you were going to do that. And yeah, you could certainly make a game heavily inspired by that, the pageantry around death metal and heavy metal. But yeah, I guess that's just a fantasy that I'd like to see have happen. It's certainly a question. If I was a real journalist and sent out questionnaire emails, I probably would email Double Fine and say, now that Activision is owned by, I would ask it in such a way as, with Activision being acquired by Microsoft, now does that change any potential future for Brutal Legend? And see what they respond, which would probably just be no comment. And it's not like I have those kinds of questions that I think of that often, so it's not like I would be a deep, good investigative journalist if I tried to be that. If I had the support to do that, the funding, the support, the contacts. New PlayStation Plus game catalog titles leak, including Crisis Core, Final Fantasy VII Reunion. Things leaking as far as PlayStation Plus game listings really don't matter. Atlas Falling is reportedly headed to Xbox Game Pass. Berserk Boy Games announces an idle RPG called Berserk Bits, which idle RPGs are the kind of games like that I like to play on my phone. Of course, that's just another way to waste more time. Ubisoft has apologized for unauthorized use of a flag in Assassin's Creed Shadow Arts. In Assassin's Creed Shadows art. The flag in question belongs to a historical reenactment group. One would assume that the historical reenactment group is using a flag that once belonged to a actual samurai tribe, I don't know what do you call them, tribes or what. Let's see. Well, I imagine this is just yet another example of, first of all, Ubisoft not really knowing how easily it is to offend Japanese people in particular, and Japanese people not being thrilled with Assassin's Creed Shadows announcement, which, done correctly, they should be ecstatic with proper good representation. But it wasn't done correctly, and I think from day one they probably didn't do it correctly, because this game has been developed in secret, seemingly, with no Japanese people or Japanese companies being involved, where it would have made a lot of sense to have cultural advisor teams in Japan and have them help you avoid any pitfalls like this. It has been in the past a stereotype that French people are rude, and Ubisoft is a French company. And yeah, so you already had the stereotype of French people sometimes are rude and Japanese people are sometimes easily offended, clashing against each other before even one line of code, one thought was rendered or made. And that's not even talking about the fact that most Westerners, and possibly a lot of Japanese people, when they wanted a ninja Assassin's Creed, did not want a samurai Assassin's Creed, where the samurai character here is not going to play like an assassin. They did not want a Assassin's Creed covering the one African samurai to ever exist historically, and they did not want a shinobi to be the assassins, and a female assassin, not really called a ninja, to be the main focus in an Assassin's Creed game, without that also being mentioned too. Like, all of these historical inaccuracies that seem to appear in so much of what they've shown us in Assassin's Creed Shadows just stack up and needed to have been addressed. Like, there should have been a trailer where you saw like a burning village, and that would have been the hint as to why this guy was going to become part of the Assassin's Guild in Japan, and why the female ninja shinobi was going to be a part of that. That a more typical what the Japanese would assume male ninja clan had been like secretly an assassin's guild, and they had been wiped out, and so these unusual heroes would then be on a path of vengeance. And maybe the story will say that, but it would have made a lot more sense if they started from a believable, historically accurate foundation point, and then had a trailer point to how it gets to that point. It would have made a lot of sense if the trailer showed this African slave being brought over by a ship and being sold to, I believe it was Nobunaga, who purchased him and made him a samurai. So it would have made a lot of sense for Nobunaga to show up in that initial trailer. Anyways, I feel like I'm going too long on that. But yeah, several times I've heard cultural inaccuracies being mentioned and complained about by more Japanese sources around Assassin's Creed Shadows. When done correctly, this would have worked fine. And we kind of know that's the case because there already is a side game with an assassin who is a ninja in China, and nobody really complained about that side game. The biggest complaint I imagine you can make with it is it's just not a mainline Assassin's Creed game. Temple Run Legends and Vampire Survivors Plus are coming to Apple Arcade. So, two bigger names, bigger games seem to be going to Apple Arcade. Which I don't expect Apple Arcade is going anywhere for a long time. There's just always going to be some kids that have Apple TVs, and Apple Arcade makes some sense with an Apple TV streaming box. But I also don't expect to see Apple products become major gaming consoles or anything like that. Switch Online members can play Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope free this week, if you're interested in that. I think it's kind of a longer game, so you probably wouldn't be able to finish it in time. Battlefield 2042's Dead Space crossover event is live. This was an event that sounded very shallow, in my opinion. Just no real respect for canon as far as Dead Space or Battlefield 2042. Two types of games that really should not have crossover events. Although, in fairness, almost all crossover events kind of suck when you're trying to play a serious game, when all of a sudden you have characters coming in from a different game that look different, act different, or are just following a completely different rule set as far as how their universe works. Magic users showing up in a first-person military shooter, for instance, is an example. Or here you have the direct example of reanimating zombie monsters showing up in a realistic, or at least somewhat realistic, modern military first-person shooter. Bandai Namco and Nike are teaming up for Tekken sneakers. I feel like we had talked about this before. Not really much to say. The Xbox TV app is now available for Amazon Fire Sticks. Now, notably, even though this is a thing, it is not getting promoted on Amazon.com. I can tell you that. I've been watching Prime Video. I have been watching the Amazon Prime Day pre-sales. And while Fire Sticks are occasionally getting promoted for sale, it is not on the back of the Xbox. Which I wouldn't be surprised if Amazon fairly quickly put some other kind of streaming service on there too. At a certain point, if you have a PC, there's no reason why you couldn't Mirrorcast or whatever Steam games, whatever the Steam app would be, to a Fire Stick. You can do that on a Chromecast, and Fire Sticks are just running Chrome. I still don't feel like Fire Sticks are the best device compared to a Chromecast, though, because it just integrates its own overlay menu more than it should. Changes the way things works, makes it a little bit less useful. Yeah, and I'm suddenly reminded that I bought the Fire TV Cube last year and then immediately got rid of it and gave it away because I was trying to get it to work with hearing aids, and the hearing aid companies were never going to really let that specific brand of hearing aids work via Bluetooth over the TV Cube. I hope the person I gave it to actually has plugged it in and used it, but frankly, there's a lot of things I give to people that I half suspect they never use. And that has in part convinced me to spend less on gifts to people. The Ghost of Tsushima and PS5 topped the US sales charts in May. Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door was the top performing brand new release, which, even getting this much information, is better than what we've been getting as far as the previous months this year, where basically nothing has been sold or talked about. Although comparing a game like Ghost of Tsushima sales to PlayStation 5 hardware sales is really comparing apples to oranges. Target is still running their buy two get one free deal. Amazon has a similar promotion as far as buying video games. There is definitely an argument to supporting companies like Target just so Amazon doesn't get that big. It is just trying to spread out the money between several evil companies that would like to merge into one mega conglomerate. But yeah, particularly when you're talking video games, buying local is fairly difficult to do. You're not going to go into a mom and pop game shop and likely find brand new games that you're looking for. GameStops are not really that franchised either, so yeah, there really isn't a great option there if you wanted to buy local, specifically support local businesses. Just try and keep it separated as much as possible. Although I would also say you probably would want to support the least efficient company, in the sense who is hiring the most people that live in your area and giving a paycheck to the most people that live in your area. And GameStop might be your best bet there. Or Target in total might be a good bet too, whereas Amazon doesn't have storefronts really. They own some other companies that have storefronts like Whole Foods, but yeah, most of what Amazon is doing is making the least amount of people work the most and paying them the least. And yeah, a lot of the money is going directly into Jeff Bezos's pocket and not in the pockets of people who actually live in your area, who would actually have a possibility of paying taxes in that area or spending their income in that area to support other businesses in your area. That's too much economics for today, though. We already talked about this, how Apex Legends players have criticized the plans to split the Battle Pass into 2 Battle Passes and then charge overall more money for the 2 Battle Passes and make it so you can only get the Battle Passes with purchases of real world money. You can't grind it out. And then City Skylines 2's console version has been delayed again, this time indefinitely. And then Rogue Company players are being offered in-game currency after Dr. Disrespect content has been pulled. PlayStation Plus games catalog. I think we've covered this as much as I really want to. Which No More Heroes 3 is being added. Haven't even played No More Heroes 2 yet. Let's see. A Toho New World DLC Gensokyo Dreaming is now available. Which, no Steam link here. I think what I did to mess up the Gamatsu part of my macro in particular is I was trying to write code to look for the Steam links, and then I think I just wrote really bad code that just broke everything and didn't really test it. Probably because I wrote the code in a bad time to be testing it, and now I'm using the fact that UI Vision is not working correctly as an excuse to not rewrite the code. So I'm making excuses to not fix things that I broke. Yep, and that's not going to get me anywhere. This Operation Tango is coming to the Switch on August 1st. Let's see. Where are we with Operation Tango? Weirdly, this is a game that should be on my fall list, but it isn't. A game called Valley Peaks for PC launches July 24th. The Switch version is not dated. This one already is on my follow list, so I'm not going to make another YouTube short. I did get a comment on one of the YouTube shorts I make saying this game is not trending, but it was a new game, so yeah. I just responded to the comment saying I'm open to suggestions. Like, I'm not married to the title of the game and the new and trending at the end for the YouTube shorts label, but the series needs some kind of descriptor, I think. So, I mean, I probably could just put the title of the game exclusively and not have anything after it, but, and yeah, new and trending isn't the best way to label it, I'm sure, but I don't know what's better. Story-driven action-adventure third-person shooter Black State has been announced for PC. This looks almost like a Crisis-inspired game. We have another game that doesn't have a Steam link yet. This could be just about anything. So far it looks good enough. I wouldn't say the animation looks great. It's kind of foggy, kind of empty in the screenshots. But yeah. Not sure what to take from it, really. I've got a tickle in my throat today, and I'm coughing quite a bit. A chaotic player versus player shooter called Frenzies has been announced for PlayStation VR 2 and Quest. VR chaotic shooter. Kind of would like to see how that possibly is going to play. Let's see if the video will load. I was having a problem with videos not loading. It turned out that one of Privacy Badger extension for some reason was blocking something from YouTube as far as cookies and things like that, tracking cookies, which, yeah, that may be an indication that YouTube itself is changing how it's doing things, which every indication is that they are doing their very best to crack down on any kind of ad blockers or even cookie blockers. Yeah, I don't. Once again, we have a video not loading, although it's not loading in a different way. See, yeah. Just disable this. See how that works. Even though I'm using Firefox, Google's new ad blocking manifest version, Chrome's manifest version 3 from Google, has really thrown just a monkey wrench into how my whole process goes. So I imagine it is definitely going to throw a monkey wrench into a lot of people's experience. We already talked about Nintendo releasing this mysterious EMIO teaser trailer, which it's really only mysterious in the sense that we've never heard anything from it. And see, that video loads fine, so in that previous case, I suspect that really is a case of just that one video being problematic. Something called Closer to Distance launches August 2nd. Let's see, a slice of life simulation game. It's already on the follow list, so I assume I've already made a video around it. Not really looking to make extra YouTube shorts. Particularly now, I want to try and save as much time as I can and not be redundant. We already talked about the NBA all consoles. NBA 2K25 being announced for all consoles and PC. Which, yeah. My listing of all consoles that changes the headline so it says all consoles instead of a long list of consoles, which is what it originally says, will have to be updated, I imagine, once the next Nintendo console is named. In particular, because if all of a sudden the Switch 2 is out and games are coming out for everything except for the Switch 2, I don't want to misreport things by saying it's for all consoles when it really isn't. When I say all consoles, I mean modern consoles. I don't mean every single console that ever existed. Obviously, that would be way too much for any one game to do. This Mushi Hime-sama game for Switch is going to be delisted on August 10th, which, yeah. I suspect we might see quite a few games start to get delisted on the Switch online store also, as Nintendo tries to perhaps clean up the Switch online storefront with better quality listings. The Famitsu review scores for issue 1857 are here on Gematsu.com. A game called Gluck for the Switch is giving 25 out of 40, pretty low. Powerful Pro Baseball 2024-25, 37 out of 40, very high. Unfortunately, these Powerful Pro Baseball games don't come to the West, I don't believe. And Super Monkey Ball Rumble, 30 out of 40, fairly low. On average, you see about a 32 out of 40 for an average game from Famitsu. And notice, you have one game here for the Switch only, another game here for the Switch only, and then Powerful Pro Baseballs for the Switch and the PlayStation 4. Nothing at all for the PlayStation 5 this week. Double Dragon Revive announced for the PS4 and 5, Xbox One and Series and PC. Gematsu has an update here. Seems like there might be a picture that we can see. Okay. So this is generally what you can expect, is that it's going to be a 3D CGI fighting game, beat 'em up game. Although questionable as far as just how zoomed in the camera is usually going to be. I imagine it's going to be this zoomed out, and that this is a cutscene, or this might be a special move attack. But special move attacks and cutscenes are probably going to be fairly uncommon if it is a multiplayer game, which I would assume it is. Going to be a two-player game at least. Todokiro Tatakae, Calamity Angels and Compile Heart X M2 shoot 'em up game has been delayed to the summer of 2025 in Japan. That almost feels like that's two different games. Yeah, it is two different games being delayed. Let's see. Modo Monogatari Via and the Mysterious School launches November 28th in Japan. This might be a Japanese RPG, but it might also just be a visual novel. Very colorful, looks like it's targeting a younger group. Yeah, Japanese RPG. Powerful Pro Baseball Ecan 9 Crossroad for the PS4 and Switch launches July 17th in Japan. Here we can see it. See some screenshots for that game. And then Sony Music Entertainment Japan, Aniplex, and Pocket Pair have jointly established Palworld Entertainment, which is a very different headline from what we got from Video Games Chronicle.com, which just said Sony, because Sony Music is just a subsidiary of Sony, in the same way that Sony Interactive Entertainment is the PlayStation division and Sony Pictures is the movie division. So now I have a much better idea of where Palworld is going, because Aniplex, although I believe is owned as a subsidiary by Sony, also this tells me that they are looking and leaning towards making a Palworld anime series. And maybe there will be little figurines and statues and merchandise too, but the focus of making Palworld Entertainment with Aniplex and Sony Music Entertainment Japan in particular is so that they can animate and have some music behind it that won't get copyright claimed in Japan in particular. And yeah, so they are trying to make basically a Pokemon cartoon type competitor. And I am seeing here that I have a Juliana Thais on the chat who has posted a whole bunch of gibberish sticker emojis, which I didn't even know you could do that on YouTube. Fortunately, the random gibberish sticker emojis, to me at least, are random gibberish. So, can't even really show them. Not that I would want to. So, yeah. Can't respond to them either. So, moving on with the video game news. Xbox Game Pass and PC Game price increase announced, including a new tier without day one game releases. I imagine when you look at people on Steam who don't care about buying games on day one or pre-ordering games, that I imagine that they're looking at those type of players and saying they want Game Pass to be an option for those kinds of players. That being said, most of the people on Steam who don't care about playing a game day one probably don't care about waiting a very long time to get a Steam summer sale. And so a back catalog that could change at any time versus having your own personal back catalog on Steam where it's unlikely that you would lose access to those games, there really is still no comparison. Yeah, you definitely would want to go to Steam and just buy the games on sale when they go on sale, deep discount, and then play them whenever you want to. An idle RPG called Berserk Bits has been announced for PC. This one does have a Steam link. It doesn't look particularly interesting to me though, I have to say. It doesn't look polished enough. A 2XKO adds Braum, which I assume this is a fighting game? Some kind of free-to-play fighting game? Never heard of it. 2XKO makes sense. I'd assume that means it's two characters playing at the 2 versus 2 fighting game. Or characters that you swap in 1 versus 1. It's a very smooth 3D animation with more of a 2D animation color palette to it, putting thick black lines on the edges of the 3D models so it stands out and feels like you're looking at a 2D animated object, which this is being done more and more to, I think, fairly large success, to have characters that don't stand out as much from what would have been the traditional 2D animation fighting game style. and you have full special attacks, which is kind of long special attack. I don't know any of these characters, so I assume these are all new characters. I would say that the animation does look a little bit off. It's very nice in the fighting characters, but the background looks like it could probably be polished a little bit more. Let's see, the Lakeview Cabin Collection is coming to the PS4 and 5 and the Xbox One and Series on July 25th. I think this is a collection of horror puzzle games. Nope, this might actually be something, a completely different game series than the one I'm thinking of. And apparently I got it for free or purchased it at some point. I must have purchased it when it was like 99 cents. And then this collection, Lakeview Cabin Collection, does not include Lakeview Cabin 2 or Lakeview Valley. So it's a couple more games there. Now noticeably this is overwhelmingly positive as a game. And it's from 2015, so it's old enough that I could make a new YouTube short on it, since I wasn't making YouTube shorts back in 2015. Yep. But yeah, this is not the game series I was thinking of, and I just don't really recognize it. Airport Sim for Xbox Series launches August 1st. Which seems like a simulation where you're doing a job and potentially doing some boring people jobs. Space for Sale launches in early access on July 30th for PC. This is something I've seen before. I don't think the screenshots are doing it a great job explaining what kind of game this is. Colony Sim, apparently. Deathbound launches August 8th. Need to stop saying I might have gotten a little bit better about doing the uhs and ahs, although I may very well have just not been listening to myself speak and doing the exact same amount of uhs and ahs. A paramedic action drama, Neo Harbor Rescue Squad, has been announced for PS4 and 5 and PC. Interesting. There is probably a lot of room for paramedics being protagonists in video games. I mean, they are very often real-world heroes, and while that might be simulating a job, I wouldn't call it simulating a boring job, and certainly it would make a lot more sense. It would be an interesting thought, certainly, to list like the top 100 games of all time according to any list, and then list what all the jobs the protagonists had otherwise. And I think you would find that 40, 50, 60, maybe even 70% of all the protagonists in the top 100 games are in some way a military warrior of some sort. Like Doom guy, I think he was military originally in the first Doom game. If not, you definitely would describe him as an Avenger military guy. BJ Blazkowicz in the Wolfenstein series, military, obviously. Halo, Master Chief, military. Yeah, I could go down a long list of military people, and it probably does speak something as far as where the focus is and where society aggrandizes and celebrates people, in that military often gets aggrandized very often, more than most other career paths. Although, in fairness, since so many games are trying to focus around first person shooting, it's an easy shortcut to make the character have a military background of some sort. Whereas Fallout New Vegas, your character is a courier, mailman effectively. So that becomes less believable as your character gets stronger and stronger and becomes the best shooter in all of the Mojave Desert in Fallout New Vegas. Moving on with the news, a Metroidvania game called Frontier Hunter Urza's Wheel of Fortune launches July 26th for the PS5 and PC. Interesting. You have a named protagonist here in Urza. Any of these screenshots want to load. Let's see. 2D Metroidvania. I think I had seen this game before. So, what was the deal? I'll tell you the deal as to why it's not on the fall list. Is that it is labeled as an early access game, and this is something that hurts a lot of games on Steam as far as whether I would ever consider purchasing them or not, is that some of these games do fairly well, but they just hold on to that early access listing way too long. Here we can see an announcement that July 26th is when it is coming out of early access, but it has been in early access since December 15th, 2022. That's a long amount of time, particularly for a Metroidvania game that really doesn't have any business being in early access in the first place. A retro-style adventure RPG called Veritas for PC launches July 22nd. It is incredibly inconsistent as far as how much news comes out on Monday versus Wednesday. We can tell. Taito Milestone 3 launches November 28th in Japan. More Taito games. Let's see. Idea is launching Cho Oniki Collection. Well, they've launched a Cho Oniki Collection teaser website. I don't know what Cho Oniki is. Side-scrolling shoot-'em-up game series. Yeah, these are possibly games that never really came to the West. And that's why I don't recognize it and why it doesn't seem to have a English title. The Case of the Golden Idol is now available for the Xbox Series, which apparently it's already been available for Steam. This too is from like 2022. Yeah. So inherently, I think it is worth questioning at least day one access on an Xbox Game Pass if you're looking for a more niche game like the Case of Golden Idol really isn't going to work in this scenario, because you could have gotten this game on October 13th, 2022, 2 years ago, relatively speaking, and played it then. And notably, had you waited till 2 months ago, May 1st, you would have been able to buy it at $10.79. Right now, it's discounted to $11.69. Although if you're going to buy all the DLC, that's going to bump it up to $20. Which, unfortunately, SteamDB's extension and plugin doesn't tell you half the price of complete editions games. Sometimes these complete editions are just soundtracks, so not so in this case. But if you don't want the soundtrack, you could save yourself a couple dollars and just buy the game plus DLC. But when you're thinking about this price, if this was the only game you were considering on playing for 1 month, it would still be about the same to just buy the game and the DLC than it would be to buy Game Pass and play it via Game Pass, which also would have to question whether you always get all the DLC through Game Pass or whether you don't get any of the DLC ever through Game Pass. It's probably somewhere in the middle there, but yeah, there is a thought certainly that the Game Pass is not even a good offer for what it's offering, and that's not even touching on the fact that a game like this might just disappear from Game Pass. Of course, this is also coming out in, I guess, non-Game Pass form, where you can either buy a disc or download it and own it forever. Let's see. Does it say the price it will be on Xbox? Probably $17.99. Slight increase in cost from buying it on Steam. And then each DLC is $6. So yeah, several dollars more expensive to buy it on Xbox One or Series. This is one we'd already talked about, so we might have hit a point where we're talking about old news. Game Boy Advance shoot 'em up RPG Sigma Star Saga is coming to modern consoles and PC in 2025. And an RPG shoot 'em up is an interesting twist on shoot 'em ups, though. I could see making a roguelite shoot 'em up or an RPG shoot 'em up, and then that would give you more motivation to keep on playing a shoot 'em up game. Although you still really want to be good at shoot 'em ups and actually enjoy shoot 'em ups if you're going to play those kinds of games. And I've never gotten good enough at shoot 'em ups to even begin to start to enjoy them. And I think that's probably true for a lot of players if you have ever played a shoot 'em up in the first place, as it is just a highly skilled requirement type of games, and it's hard to get into them. They were much more popular back when they were in arcade machines. Retro Revengers is coming to the PS4 and 5 and the Xbox One Series on July 23rd. It's also been available on Steam. Here's a side-scrolling game that is in part a platformer and part has a shoot 'em up section, although it probably is mostly a side-scrolling platforming game. Shiren the Wanderer, the mystery dungeon of Serpent Coil Island, second major content update is now available. This is older news, but I only have a few of them, so we'll just go through them again. El Paso Elsewhere is coming to the PS5 on September 6th. This is another one to see what happened here. Yeah, these screenshots don't really sell me on this game, but it is mostly positive. Very positive overall. Sometimes there are rare occasions when the screenshots just don't sell a game to me very well. Blackfinger Jet is going to be published and co-developed by Red Dunes Games. So that's information about a game that is not out yet. It will be playable at the Tokyo Game Show. And then Nintendo Switch Sports has its basketball update launched July 9th. Crazy that they're adding entire games into Nintendo Switch Sports, and crazy it didn't have those games in the first place. And then Paper Ghost Stories Third Eye Opens launches September 5th. Let's see if this is in early access. Nope. these paper ghost stories. Paper element here might work for getting more people willing to play scarier type of games, but I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't. I saw a review talking about the latest what is it? Camera Obscura is the name of the device. Lady of Blackwater is the subtitle of the game series. Fatal Frame is the name of the series. I had to work my way backwards to that. The latest Fatal Frame game. And one of the complaints that this hour-long video criticism of Lady of Blackwater, Fatal Frame, Lady of Blackwater, was that there were horror aspects and elements in the game, but also there is just this wet t-shirt element that was happening in the middle of those horror concepts too, and the fact that there is just a lot of lewd costumes or slightly lewd costumes. The Blackwater concept and water and wetness is a concept in the game, and then you're playing as anime girls, good-looking anime girls, young-looking anime girls, whatever you want to describe them as. So they often will get wet, and then the clothes will stick to them and become see-through. And there are costumes that will accentuate that, and I imagine the default costumes don't focus on that too much, but it is kind of a visual distraction. Now, in fairness to Fatal Frame, Lady of Blackwater, Maiden of Blackwater is I think the actual name, anime in particular has much more of a genre of horror mixed in with violence, mixed in with nudity and sex. And there's quite a lot of history of that. Demon City is a movie, I believe, is the one I'm thinking of, although there's another one that's almost exactly the same as Demon City that I get the two confused. Or you could even go back to the classic Akira, in that there is a scene early on in Akira where a biker gang girl gets like punched in the face, and then they tear her shirt off, and the violence there is intentionally added with the nudity to just contrast it and create an unease and an awkwardness in the viewer, or to at least explore those elements in the same thing. There is a Devilman anime series that had a spin-off called Devil Lady, and in that there's a lot of monsters and beasts that are topless and nude. So yeah, there's just a lot more history to that, where it is actually, in contrast, kind of crazy that we are up to Saw 10 in the Saw series, and yet every single character that I can think of in the Saw universe, with the exception of one lady who awkwardly is just completely naked in one of the movies, every single other female and male in the series is fairly well covered up and clothed, while also being locked into horrific saw traps and getting mutilated and killed and destroyed. And yeah, it is just kind of crazy that that's the case. And it's not even really continuing with the history of Western horror movies, because certainly was the case that some of the early Friday the 13th movies had more nudity in them, and that's just kind of gone away. More puritanical views, more censorship has happened in the West. So yeah, I don't know if I'm fully making sense here, but it is actually very strange the direction horror movies have gone. It's very strange that there's just not more lewdness or romance or sexuality in movie and TV in the West in general. Is created, particularly in the United States, very puritanical, expecting people, whether they actually feel that way themselves or not. It just becomes the norm to people. And so anything outside of what their local norm is in their state, in their city, in their community just feels out of place. Anyways, let's move on. 10 years in, Bungie is shifting Destiny 2 pacing in the live service shakeup. This is from GameDeveloper.com. I would assume Destiny 2 was probably pretty close to going into maintenance mode, but also I just don't think Bungie can just announce a Destiny 3 and convince people to move over to a Destiny 3 and start all over again. Probably want to make something new, and we already talked about Pocket Pair forming a Pal World Entertainment with Sony Music. Sony Music Japan, here you have GameDeveloper.com again in their headline, not really fully explaining it all, and Aniplex. Microsoft increasing the price of Xbox Game Pass, introducing a new standard plan that ditches Day 1 access. Hooded Horses, Tim Binder doesn't think constant growth should define games. This was a Twitter back and forth, I believe. Somebody, Manor Lord's publisher advocates for letting games be measured by their developers' own aspirations rather than thinking of the numbers having to always go up as far as sales. In particular, Manor Lords is a single player game, I believe. And so people played it and had their fun with it, and now less people are buying the game and less people are playing it, so the number of concurrent players is not as high, which is really a metric that unfortunately a lot of people, including myself, use. And it is in this shakeup that even I have to reevaluate. Is there a better way I can think of to highlight games? I definitely know when I look at the SteamDB list of the top 100 concurrent played games, I'm seeing a lot of Counter-Strike 2. I'm seeing a lot of player versus player games that always are in the top 10 or 20, and I'm not seeing Manor Lords, for instance, which might creatively be more impactful and worth talking about more than Counter-Strike 2 always being in number one spots for Steam. There was a post here on LinkedIn of all places, which LinkedIn should not be turning itself into a social media site anyways. The pitfalls of early access, implying that early access severely hurt Manor Lords in particular and stopped them from seeing the numbers go higher and higher. And generally speaking, it does seem like if you put your game in early access, you are going to get a lot of success and potentially a lot of sales early on, and you're not going to have that launch day major sales number to advertise to a publisher to get funded to that next game you want to make. That being said, instead of saying launch day sales or launch window sales is really what you would talk about to a publisher to be funded for the next game, you just talk about the lifetime sales of a game and use that number as the pitch, or you talk about early access plus launch window sales, and then you get back to a big number. There's plenty of ways you can manipulate the numbers to say your game was successful, although inherently it would probably prevent a publisher from funding you if they wanted to put microtransactions into your game and have a player base just play your game non-stop for months. which most publishers would like to do that, certainly, for almost any game. Moving on, Monster Hunter Stories 2 has topped 2 million in sales in 3 years. This is another great example of really comparing sales numbers for different types of games, where a side spin-off game of the Monster Hunter series, which wasn't even really well known 6 or 7 years ago in the West, has reached a pretty big number at 2 million, but took 3 years to get there. But 2 million is still a good number, like, even if it took a little bit longer. Roblox is rolling out a Unity-style analytics tool for developers. Roblox is constantly, I think, going to try and court more people making games in the Roblox universe instead of people making their own games, which is, I mean, this is effectively just the same thing Bethesda wants to do with its Creation Club concept. Respawn doubles the Apex Legends Battle Pass price in a systematic overhaul. We already talked about that. No way to make that sound good. And Colossal Order has delayed Cities Skylines 2 console launch due to unresolved issues. Then Zenless Zone Zero launches with 50 million worldwide downloads. Which, yeah. Downloads, potentially one assumes for free, in no way really comparable to 2 million actual sales for Monster Hunter Stories. It's very much just apples and oranges. You could get 1 billion downloads. That doesn't mean any of that is converting to actual income for Zenless Zone Zero. Some of it probably is, but nobody knows what that ratio would be. And then Piranha Bytes veterans established an indie development studio called Pithead Studio. And that's going to bring me to all the games that came out on Steam. And I think we are going to see a lot more games today, in the same way that we saw a lot more news today. Here we have yet another clicker game. Princess Maker Regeneration is now out. 3 reviews so far. There is not censorship in the PC version. There is censorship in the PlayStation version. A little bit of censorship. Seems like the polish might be a problem here as far as text being too small to read, which I could certainly see that. Like, it does look like it is fairly small text. The big selling point on Regeneration versus the Refine remake, I believe, is that you can now see the stats of the daughter you're raising here go up and down, so you can better follow walkthroughs, which you still would probably have to follow to get whatever endings you want to get. Ideally, if you were going to fully remake this, there would just be branching paths maps that tells you what to do to raise the daughter one way or the other, and there would be a rewind function and save state functions, which would be very easy for a game this old to just have a save state in every single decision and be able to rewind back to that decision and make a different decision. Although at a certain point it might just be easier just to hack the save file. Luca Hayes is out now. Construct a dungeons builder. Gives that a chance. Game of Time. Looks like it might be something. Time request. These screenshots definitely make me think this is not worth it, so I'm gonna say no. And definitely no to any clickers. I'll give this card game a chance. Are we saying no to prologues? I think we are. We saying no to shadow time. I'll give this a chance. Do we have another getting over it clone? I saw Video Game Donkey playing Chained Together, some of his footage he put up on his little shorts, and there is something to that idea of having multiple players be chained together and have that save point. Although you could certainly do that in a single player too by just having save points, respawn points if you fall. But yeah, I could see the beginnings of making some of these jump on random assets that are floating in the air type games. Once there's a little bit more polish on the gameplay mechanic and a lot more polish on the level designs. Here's one of them though. But the problem also you're running into now is that Steam is so oversaturated with these garbage takes on this concept that it's probably never going to happen that somebody makes a really great one. Chained Together is probably the best we're ever going to see for these kinds of climbing games. And my default instinct is that after one climbing game like Up gets released, clones of those games should be under higher scrutiny and less allowed on Steam. Whereas Steam's libertarian perspective would say, let's not benefit the consumer as much by having a clean storefront in which people can actually find good games, and then instead let's just have a open field in which evolution of competition, or an open marketplace where competition amongst different games will potentially see games get better and rise to the crop. Although inherently you really never do see that in any form of capitalism, in that pure open competition leads to better products being made and the consumer being served better because of competition. Some might argue there's never been pure open competition because copyrights exist, and you really would have to eliminate the concept of a copyright to have purest forms of competition. People would have to be able to just rip off entire concepts for the purest form of competition, which I don't think most people would benefit from that either. So yeah, very rarely do we see products get better. Like cars are a weird example. Cars have been iterated on and developed for decades. Do we have better cars now than we did decades ago? Yes, obviously. Do we have a perfect car? No. Do we have any agreement on what makes even a better car these days? No. Is it true that a lot of times cars come out and they are lemons? They are worse than previous year's models. They are designed in ways that nobody really wants them to be designed in. Sure. Video games are kind of in a unique spot in that you can copy and iterate very fast with video games, whereas card development can't be done as fast. For comparison. And I'm not even mentioning whether I'm picking something or not. I should always just explain that if I come over here and click follow, that means I'm going to make a YouTube short on it and highlight it. If I then move the mouse downward like that, I'm closing the tab and not making a YouTube short on it, which normally I would not do that if I clicked it and put it on the follow list. Otherwise, I'm going to move the mouse from the left to the right. These are mouse gestures I've installed to make it easier, so I'm not having to go up and down to click tabs and close them or hit keyboard commands. And honestly, like when a game like Banana as a clicker game comes out, there is a copyright-like protection that would make sense on Steam, where obvious direct clones of those games might be stopped, could be stopped by Valve. They probably would never be stopped by Valve from being listed until, say, 6 weeks, 6 months, whenever. So we're not quite done with the show, but we're close. So here's SteamDB, and again my tabs are just all out of order, otherwise we would have looked at this first. We can see that the Banana is still in the number 4 spot, not number 1, thank goodness. But PUBG's Battlegrounds and Naraka Blade Point and Elden Ring all seem like they've moved a little higher. Counter-Strike 2 still in the top 24-hour concurrent players. Of course, the question is, how many of these are bots? And how many on Banana are bots? You just don't really know. And you'll almost certainly see that Banana as a clicker with some Steam Marketplace shadiness, also why it's so popular, will almost certainly be the only clicker game in the top 100. And the vast majority of these games in the top 100 are going to have multiplayer focused elements chained together here in the 46th spot. People still playing a lot of Fallout 4, Fallout TV series, I imagine. Got a lot of people playing it, and I imagine there's just a high number of people still playing it because of that. Yeah. Still not really seeing anything amazing new on the list here. And this is where concurrent players, I think, really do drop the ball, is that when I take this information and I convert it to my own chart, all it really tells me is that going back as far as I was sampling data, 1/1/2024 is what I've limited this down, going back to January 1st. The conversation is just around Pal World and Counter-Strike 2 and Banana and these other games. So if I was going to do an end-of-year recap, Manor Lords, for example, just not on this list at all. First Descendant, very possibly, is not going to be on this list by the end of the year. Last Epoch, showing up here, starting kind of low. And there might actually be a data point for Manor Lords. Helldivers 2 might even fall off the list. And then Naraka Blade Point does have a history, certainly worth mentioning. And then this chart generally just tells me the trend as far as are people playing less of these big games or more. Stardew Valley, weirdly, people are playing more of those. And then we've got the last of the Steam summer sale. Today being the last day. I will bother to go and do the curator and get one more trading card. Not that I'm probably going to even be able to turn one set of trading cards into a badge. 15% off. Today is also the last day for 15% off the LCD older versions of the Steam Deck. I would suspect you're not going to get a discount on the OLED versions anytime between now and Christmas. If anything does happen for the OLED versions, it'll be like Black Friday. But the LCD versions might very well go on sale again. But you might get better discounts if you get a refurb one also. I'm not expecting a new Steam Deck to be announced in the rest of this year. It would make a lot of sense at this point to wait until the next Nintendo console is announced and just make sure that whatever the next Steam Deck is, it is not creating any problems or creating any bad vibes between the next Nintendo console and the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck is going to want to feel like it's a better device in every physical hardware specification than the next Nintendo console, and it's going to want to still have a bit of a segregation in that the Steam Deck is going to be very obviously for PC games being played on Linux emulation, where the next Nintendo console is going to be more games that are Nintendo specific and unique. Valve, I don't know why they do this, but Valve is very interested in maintaining a good relationship with Nintendo, despite the fact that Nintendo has not put any of their games out on PC or Steam in particular. Yeah, I think it may very well be the case that Valve is just hoping to play the long game there and eventually wear down Nintendo. And now is the time to certainly try that, because with the new Nintendo president of Japan, their things are potentially different. You can see Monopoly Plus is mixed reviewed, and Tabletop Simulator I recently played and I was very disappointed in what that actually was. I was expecting it to be much more of a game first and less of a kind of simplistic simulator game. Is this a adult game? Shouldn't be. Yeah, still lots of games they can advertise to you on Steam. Most of them already on my wish list, though. Yep, this one I can go ahead and just put on the wish list. It's not in early access, it's rated very positive. Would I ever actually play this? Maybe not. And then this one is still in early access, and so that's why I'm keeping this one on the follow list. And that certainly sucks about Steam, is that they don't label things that are on the follow list. They only label things that are on the wish list. Apparently the UK Elden Ring sales rose nearly 500% in June thanks to Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. Okay. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Splintered Fate for PC is coming in Q4 2024 with local co-op support, as I'm sure what that's supposed to be, not co-op, because that doesn't mean anything. And then, see, that's the weird thing about this, is it always opens like one tab in the right spot, and then it makes all the other tabs somewhere else. It moves things around, either after the whole process is done or immediately as the next step. Apparently, the Swedish game industry wants video games recognized as a cultural canon. The trade association Dataspelbranschen has selected 15 titles it believes should be commemorated. I don't know if that adds any special rights to the games in Sweden or if it gives any kind of financial support to the game industry. I, in general, kind of agree with the sentiment, but yeah, also really don't think gamers should care about what a government thinks as far as video games. If anything, I would just prefer governments stay out of artistic creations in general and just believe in free speech in general and not try and censor or legislate anything. Anyways, that's going to be it for the stream. We didn't go as long as I thought we might. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, and keep on watching. Thanks.